every problem that I tackled in life, whether it was sort of music or sports or whatever, I kind of saw as like this, almost this language problem.
Peter Danenberg is a senior software engineer at Google DeepMind, where he leads 0-to-1 development for Gemini. Peter holds degrees from Harvard and USC, spanning computer science, philosophy, classics, and piano. A background that shapes his belief that peak performance, human or artificial, is as much philosophical of a project as it is a technical one.
The crazy thing about Google is that you can pick any activity, and it could be music or it could be Olympic weightlifting or whatever. And there's always going to be some person there who's like literally just top of the game. Talking about doctors. And the doctor's either your best friend or kind of your worst enemy. I feel like in sports and music, programming and learning and all these disciplines, I feel like it's difficult to replace that one-on-one connection with other humans and other experts. I'm not sure whether AI can really step in yet and do that. My son said, and this kind of broke my heart, he said, I can think, I don't like my thoughts anymore.
You play piano in the evenings. Is that because it helps you wind down? Does it help you kind of escape the realms of AI and be in a different zone for a bit?
Such a tough one. So
hey, what's up, Traction fam? This is Ray, your host. I'm back with another episode with a guest I think you guys are going to love. Peter Danenberg is a senior software engineer at Google DeepMind, where he leads 0-to-1 development for Gemini, building features like Gemini Canvas and Gemini Agent for prototype to production, with visibility at the CEO level. He is also a senior research fellow at the Oxford Institute for Ethics in AI, exploring how AI can support genuine, truth-seeking inquiry. Beyond tech, Peter co-founded CrossFit Crown City, scaling it to 450 members across 2 locations, and he has spent years at the intersection of physical training and cognitive performance. He has spoken at TEDx Boston, the House of Lords, Davos, and MIT on the future of AI and human potential. Peter holds degrees from Harvard and USC, spanning computer science, philosophy, classics, and piano. A background that shapes his belief that peak performance, human or artificial, is as much philosophical of a project as it is a technical one. Peter, thanks for joining us.
Hey, Ray, thanks so much, man. Appreciate it.
So there's a lot to unpack here. You've got an impressive background, and you're doing great work. But let's start with, who is Peter Danenberg? What drives you and what motivates you?
So I was just thinking about that the other day because I get this question all the time. And this, honestly, for my entire life, this question has boggled my mind. Somebody asked me, Peter, like, what do you want? And honestly, I have no idea. And I was just reflecting on how I got to wherever I am today. And for whatever reason, this was back when I was a kid. I absolutely, for some reason, I loved languages. And I thought, I taught myself Greek and Latin when I was a kid, and piano and a bunch of other things. And my folks are scientists, and I thought, DNA is also kind of this language-like thing. But, and so every problem that I tackled in life, whether it was sort of music or sports or whatever, I kind of saw as like this, almost this language problem. And then anyway, fast forward years, and then like somehow I wound up in like NLP, and then this assistant thing led to this Bard thing, led to this Gemini thing. And I don't know, it's just been this kind of crazy, circuitous journey. And it's one of those things where like, I can't say that I necessarily set out on purpose to kind of do this thing, but somehow find myself here. And in that sense, it's just been sort of, I don't know, it's been kind of interesting being at ground zero for this whole LLM and AI thing, And but I'll tell you the truth, I don't know exactly how I got here. I guess I'll put it that way.
And I guess a lot of us don't know where we're going because AI is changing so fast. Now, I would be really naive to not talk about AI with you, but that's not where I want to start. What I want to do is dive into your background with human performance. You started CrossFit Crown City. What's the origin story of Peter, the CrossFit athlete, and Peter, the entrepreneur?
Man, that was so interesting. Yeah, I remember. So this is way back when I lived in SoCal. It's one of those things where I had played rugby kind of more or less my entire life, or since I was a teenager. But nevertheless, like just my athletic journey was kind of, let's say, I didn't know exactly where I was going. I was playing tennis one day, which was just sort of a bizarre, like somehow myself, like basically myself playing tennis is a little bit weird, just because I'll put it this way, at like 275 or 285 or whatever it was at the time, like maybe not the nimblest person in the world. So somehow to be like, yeah. It was a little bit rough. But anyway, so this woman came up to me and said, by the way, there's this crazy thing called CrossFit. We just started this gym, and do you want to check it out? And at the time, it was kind of amazing because I don't know what it did. It somehow hit all my pain points and my strength. There was somehow, you had to do this strength, this endurance, this mobility, this gymnastics business. And like some of that stuff, honestly, was stretching me in these really bizarre, like painful directions. And so anytime I'm engaged in activity, which is incredibly difficult, I love it for some reason. And, even to this day, like I just discovered this gym the other day, this NC Fit, which is like Jason Khalipa's gym. And they were doing some workout the other day, which was, like overhead squats and wall walks and just all this business where essentially like just the mechanics and the physics of my body is working against me. But somehow just to be in that environment where I'm being stretched again is amazing. But in any case, so I started this kind of CrossFit journey. And at some point I thought, you know what, maybe I'll just try to start my own box, because I was sort of frustrated with kind of this or that sort of thing. And I met this guy, Tom Scoble, and somehow like, one thing led to another. And I guess what I realized at that time, starting CrossFit Crown Crown City is that I feel like, and I don't know, how you feel about this running a business, is that, Tom and I, through serendipity, we had this kind of yin-yang relationship. And, and outside of marriage, probably starting a business with somebody, it's the closest thing to marriage I can kind of think of. And so we had this yin-yang sort of thing where, Tom was incredibly disciplined about the cash. And I remember I had all these kind of crazy ideas and we just got together and it somehow magically worked. And I remember that day when we put down a few $100,000 and we kind of opened the door and we had no idea what was going to happen. Somehow people came in and somehow they felt something was magical and somehow the thing grew from, 0 to a few hundred people more or less overnight. But I remember at the time, part of that was, and honestly, that's part of this journey that I'm on now with the Gemini meetup and this and that, somehow being able to see the people that came into the gym and being able to figure out where they are and being able to, not only come up with like workouts just to kind of meet them where they are and challenge them in interesting ways, but just sort of like I think about this once in a while, like one of the things I'm most proud of actually is that somehow at our gym, like we had a bunch of people that got married and we had a bunch of people that had kids. And so once in a while I think to myself, man, they're like all these people running around in the world that might not exist, if we hadn't opened that gym. Exactly. And so I'm thinking, man, like maybe that's like literally, my legacies in some sense.
I think that's very underrated is community. And being in the tech space, we hear a lot about community, and it's more centered around your social following, your TikTok followers, how big is your customer base, that's your community. But community is a lot more than that. And CrossFit is a great example. The ongoing joke was, how do you know somebody's in CrossFit? Because they'll never stop talking about CrossFit, right? But that's because they're engaged. They love it. There's something there that they want to share with you, and that's community. How did that? I guess you're seeing some of the fruits of the labor, and the kids that are popping out from the members that got married. But what does it feel like to have built that community?
I mean, so one of the things is because when I moved up for Google, and that was I can't believe that was like 13 years ago already. So I ended up selling the gym, and then one of the things I've been trying to figure out ever since then is sort of how to build these communities. And so one of the things I did after that was I ran a CrossFit kind of out of Google for a while. I started this thing called Google Rugby, and then most recently, started this Gemini meetup. And in some sense, like I've been trying to figure out over the past 15 or 20 years, like how to get people together and create this virtuous space where people come, they feel encouraged. And, one of the places where we met at this Gemini meetup, I mean, let's say we get together and we run this thing every 2 weeks, and I call it a Gemini meetup, but really this is actually just people getting together and talking about whatever. And it could have something to do with LLMs, or it couldn't, it could be something totally different. But just this fact that people have a place to go every other Friday night, and people tell me, they come there, that's basically almost their night out or something. It's like they could go to the movies, they could go to dinner, but they come to the Gemini meetup. And so, I think there's something really beautiful about that. It's one of those magical things to me where like, I don't know how to force something like that. And the one thing that I don't quite understand about community is that it seems to have a certain amount of timeliness. You happen to be in a place at a time, and then you create this spark, and then the community spontaneously forms around this thing or not. There have been other communities that I've tried to start that just kind of didn't really work. And so that whole kind of magical combination of like right place, right time spark, I don't know if there's something kind of divine in that, but like, I don't know how to force something like that. It seems like it's almost like something that, the universe is sort of calling you to do. And like, let's say, because I know there are people who make community their business, let's say. And I don't know if I'd necessarily know how to do that. Like, I feel like in some sense, and this sounds a little bit weird maybe, but I'm basically listening to a calling in some sense, or that's how it feels at least, that there was some necessity to do this thing. And then this guy, Justin, and I kind of did it. But that whole process to me is still magical. Like, I don't know, Justin and I talk every once in a while about like, would we be able to kind of monetize this community or something? And, I'll tell you the truth, I wouldn't really know how to do that.
Again, speaking from experience, I've been doing this for 15 plus years, where at Launch Academy, we started with building a community with startups and entrepreneurs, first-time entrepreneurs. And then Traction is about growth marketing, and then investors, and then C-suite. And then now I'm doing that again with Open Sport, with athletes. It can't be forced. It's a community together. It has to be something that is genuine, and there's a level of organic growth that happens. And it can't come, you can have a little bit of the culture and everything top-down driven, but it all comes with the members. You have to have good people in a room. You put good people in a room together, great things will happen. And if you try to monetize it right away, you're going to ruin that vibe. There has to be some level of monetization to keep things going, whether it's corporate sponsors or products or services that are baked into it. But there has to be that organic level of growth in there.
No, that's a good point. And then, Ray, I don't know what your intuition is, but, one of my feelings is that, people, let's say they go on social media, let's say, and that could be LinkedIn or that could be Instagram or whatever. They're like awash and all of this crazy, let's say, or people call it AI slop or whatever it is, all this junk. And my sense is that they're retreating from that world of social media to a place where they can actually finally meet people again. And I don't want want to say like, my wife kind of reminded me the other day, like it's been like 6 years since COVID, which is like a little bit hard to believe. But I wonder in some sense, if the world is finally healing in the sense that people are like actually seeking out these communities again, there's this thriving kind of energy. And, and in that sense, I wonder whether, I don't know, I just wonder whether it's the right time for that sort of thing and whether, yeah.
I think people are tired of Zoom meetings. Remember the Zoom happy hours? Like, what the hell is that?
That's crazy, right?
But definitely IRL, like doing events, doing meetups and things. Like we get 200 people like that showing up. And to the Google meetup, like Gemini, I can attest to it. For 3 months now, 4 months, I've been coming to these events. And I live in Vancouver. I come to San Francisco every once in a while. And I try to now line it up when I think the next Gemini meetup's going to be, because I want to be there.
That's amazing. Yeah.
And you don't just talk about Gemini. You open it up. It's really bringing a community together, and people are talking about the things that they're building, projects they're excited about, new nuggets of wisdom that have come through, celebrating your birthday. That was a fun one.
That's right.
But I want to get back to your physical. You're a big guy. Last I recall, your PR for bench was 405.
Man, I used to have 405 pretty easy. I think it's like PR was maybe like more sort of 455-ish, something like that. Yeah. And then, but the funny thing was, man, for me, that was peak rugby. And the funny thing is, just speaking about this, I think this was like literally February of 20. I remember this was kind of an awful, I had this one really tough rugby game, which basically I essentially got a double concussion. And plus, I think I was one of the first people in February of 20. So I had double concussion plus COVID. And people didn't really know what COVID was at the time, but I was kind of, I think I was one of these like early cases. And so, man, that was like, I think basically that was like a triple whammy. And so I remember, but for me, like, like peak rugby form for me, because I was in the tight five, was about like, let's say 315 pounds. And just part of my job was just really to punch the ball through. And one of the things that I've had to figure out since then is just how, because at the time, like I was trying to figure out what comes after rugby. I was trying all these crazy sports. Like probably the weirdest one was like ultimate frisbee, man. Like it's hard for me to think of a more divergent sport from rugby than ultimate frisbee. I mean, ultimate frisbee, unfortunately, it turns out that you can look at somebody the wrong way and they call it a spirit foul. And somehow, it's like, so for me, like I was basically like literally just trying not to hurt people. And then it turns out that like, anyway, you can do emotional damage on like the frisbee field or whatever. So anyway, so I'm learning how to play all these new sports. And so in some sense, I had to adapt to a completely different body type. I had to figure out how to like drop from about 315 to maybe, I don't know, let's say like 265 or whatever. And just to be able to kind of run around. And so one of the things I've been doing now is playing soccer and just some of these other sports. But one of the things that I've been trying to do along the way, like you mentioned, was I've been trying to see whether sort of AI could help me be strategic about this, let's say, shift in my body type, shift in my physical makeup to be able to accommodate some of these new sports. And like to a certain extent, the base models were okay at that kind of thing. But for the most part, I felt like in the absence of a trainer, I was basically on my own, essentially, let's say, doing this more or less by trial and error. And to your point, like, there are these people, let's say, these high net worth individuals, these valuable athletes who have access to like top-notch trainers, and somebody could probably dial them in. And instead of taking like, a couple of years to figure out how to go from like 315 to 265 and develop all these new skills like agility and nimbleness and like speed and whatever, maybe instead of 2 years, you could bring that down to like 6 months or like who knows, whatever. But, I just wonder whether that's the sort of thing where AI can help a little bit in the future. But my sense is, and we talked about this a little bit, is that even in sports, I feel like in sports and music, even in programming and learning and all these disciplines, like I feel like it's difficult to replace that one-on-one connection with other humans and other experts. And I don't know, I'm not sure whether AI can really step in yet and do that.
Yeah, we'll get to this in a second, but like human in the loop, like humans need to be involved. It's not AI or human. And in my opinion, it's how can humans integrate with AI or integrate AI into their human-to-human interactions. But before we get there, you started a new career, I heard. You're a professional bodyguard, security guard. What's this happen at Davos?
Yeah. So, crazy thing is we were in this dome, and the dome's a little bit schizophrenic, and the dome has no exits. So when I was there, it was a little bit funny. Somehow some light fixture like got close to this plant and basically like erupted. And so in this dome in Davos, there was a fire, and somehow somebody ended up putting it out. I think they put out an electrical fire with water, which I heard is not. But anyway, we were talking about this, and we realized, man, like if there was actually a fire in that thing, there's no way to get out. Like your only way to get out is literally like punch a hole through this dome, which is a little crazy. But so anyway, so Eric Schmidt was there in this kind of claustrophobic environment, speaking on the stage, and needed to get through this throng of people. And so I think they were looking for somebody. So his chief of staff basically grabbed me and says, listen, I deputize you, I anoint you like Eric Schmidt's bodyguard. He said, listen, bro, I need you to part this crowd like the Red Sea, and you're going to have to like get Eric through this thing. And anyway, it's a little bit crazy because I remember so I was basically trying to guide him through some like back kitchen thing. And I didn't quite take the optimal route. And I remember Eric was getting a little bit irritated. But yeah, somehow like, and then it was crazy because I had to stand watch by his door. And literally, like, I just never thought I'd be doing this. I literally had to keep like the groupies away essentially. And anyway, just sort of it's a bizarre experience.
Yeah, you never know where life's going to take you, right?
Yeah. You're right.
But what I'm bringing it back to is that, so from professional athlete to one of the leading minds in AI, in my opinion, and then now professional bodyguard, you are still physically in shape. Given your day-to-day with LLMs and everything, the craziness that happens, what's your routine to keep yourself physically still in shape, physically able to still run the rigors of their day-to-day?
I mean, I'll tell you the truth, man, my routine's a little bit weird. And, sometimes my wife, she gives me a little bit of crap for this, but I do weird things. Like, just as an example, so in the morning, there's this like 7 a.m. Soccer game with the Stanford undergrads. So I'll hop in with the Stanford undergrads. Sometimes I'll hop in with like the Google guys at noon. And then sometimes I have this evening league at like 3 or in the evening or whatever. So let's say it's possible maybe during the course of a day, I don't know, maybe I'll have literally like 3 soccer games or something. And then interspersed in which is like a little bit of CrossFit or this and maybe some rugby on the weekends and a little bit of this, a little bit of that. But I'll tell you the truth, it's a little bit of a difficult time in Silicon Valley right now. Like even just this last week or whatever, a bunch of these places like announcing layoffs and even like, let's say, DeepMind hasn't been immune from these things. And so I want to say, I feel like the physical exertion is a good in and of itself. And the fact is it grounds you. I feel like it makes you more robust against some of these things that creep in, like even just the evils of like cortisol. And let's say if you're grinding and you're in the stress mode all the time, I think eventually it sort of eats away your sense of well-being, your creativity and that sort of. And so I feel like this is the best armor that you can possibly have against this like creeping cortisol effect and this acidic kind of thing that it has on like, creativity and well-being. But it's also kind of a good in and of itself. And like I had this crazy experience the other day. So I was coming back from Austin. There was this little thing called the Cosmos Institute. And it was kind of a cool thing. They were talking about like philosopher builders and, how like, I don't know, this next iteration of AI is going to be like philosophically grounded and whatever. Anyway, so I was on the flight back. This is like Austin to San Francisco. So there's a non-zero probability, bro, that on this plane you're going to meet like a tech bro or something. So anyway, so I was just sitting next to this guy and I think he came from the conference and we were just kind of like talking about this open claw thing, and that everybody's been talking about. And then this person in front of us stands up, she turns around and she says, all you guys are talking about is AI. Like, I can't stand it anymore. I'm trying to relax. Like, please shut up. And like, I was like, oh my God, dude. And like, in some sense, I sort of know where they were coming from in the sense that like, but I feel like in the sense that it is stressful, maybe you don't want to hear about it all the time. However, I feel like somehow if you can keep your body grounded, you can keep your sanity grounded, and maybe you can navigate these crazy, somewhat unprecedented times that we're going through. And there's a funny thing, and I know like if you take some of these philosophers like Kant, they say religiously, he used to walk, I think it was 3 times a day. And on these walks, he would come back with his best ideas. And I gotta say, man, like sometimes it's when I'm in the CrossFit gym or it's when I'm on the field, just have these crazy ideas, man, that like, I don't know if they necessarily would have come to me if I'm just sitting in front of my desk. And
part of it, when you exert yourself physically, I get the same thing. When I go for my runs after my workouts, I feel that's when I get the best ideas. And I think a part of it is it's the blood oxygen level. And I forgot what the terminology is you have the brain barrier and oxygen permeates that brain barrier a lot easier when there's certain things in your blood. And that doesn't happen unless you are physically exerting yourself. And so more oxygen going to your blood allows you to think clearly and do things in a more creative way. And there's things like creatine. There's now these studies where the recommended dose is 5 milligrams a day. Some people are taking up to 10 milligrams a day, but they've identified that people that are sleep deprived or people that are over 60, taking a high dose of 20 milligrams or more per day is actually helping their brain cognition. And so creatine, you think, oh, well, that's for muscle building, but 95% goes to your muscle, but 5% goes to your brain. And so when you overload, more goes to your brain.
It's funny, man. I never, ever did creatine. And for some reason a few months ago, my wife kind of turned me on to it. And I just thought, like your body makes creatine. I got protein. Like, what's the big deal? And then I started hearing all these stories about how like creatine was helping people with things like brain fog and all this business. And, the weird thing is because of this like strange physical regimen that I had, I was literally existing in this state of constant muscle soreness. fast, like just perpetual. And I remember this thing was kind of maddening. And then a couple of teaspoons of creatine a day, bro. And it's actually been like kind of incredible. Like both in terms of sleep and like recovery. And I had no idea. And the only thing somebody was telling me though, I think if you're not careful, and I forget if it's the kidneys or the liver or something like that, I think somebody was saying if you don't hydrate quite enough, there's a little bit of a danger there. But it seems like as long as you have that covered, that's good.
Yeah, my co-founder, Lloyd Lobo, who hosts some of these episodes with me, his wife is a Stanford doctor, and she's got a whole series on Instagram now where she's talking about some of these fallacies, but also best practices. And one of the fallacies was creatine's bad for your kidneys and what. It's been disproven.
Interesting.
Creatine is probably one of the best supplements out there with little to no negative side effects. And it does force your body to retain more waters, and that's why your muscles feel better, is because they're a little more hydrated.
Interesting.
But now there's like so many other things that are popping up, like peptides and sauna versus cold plunge. Like, are you seeing this stuff?
That's crazy. I got to be more plugged into that stuff. And I realize when I hear about these things, I just like maybe if I'm in the CrossFit gym, I'll overhear some conversation, but I'm not actively like plugged into these things. And I wonder whether I could benefit from some of that stuff too. But yeah, by the way, after the show, maybe send me some leads, man, if you have any.
Yeah, for sure. I'll connect you to Lloyd. He'll.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that, bro.
But like, so we're driving to the realm of physical training and cognitive performance, something that you spend a lot of time on, cognitive performance, not so much after physical training, but just in general. It sounds simple on the surface. Train well, you're going to think well, but it's a lot more complex. How would you describe the work that you're doing in the cognitive space outside of physical?
Yeah, it's one of those things where, so I have a little bit of a weird job at Google. Like I have this team, which is a team of one called, it's called Gemini 0 to 1 or whatever. And I think in some sense, they kind of didn't know what to do with me. So they gave me this team. But my job is to basically think of these really crazy ideas on the edge of the possible and then like make them happen. And ideally maybe make them happen in like 24 hours or whatever. But part of where these crazy ideas come from is talking to people. So it's this community, it's this in real life thing. It's getting feedback from people, getting ideas, riffing, just generally trying things out. And then I feel like just generally, like you said, when you're in this state of physical exertion or pushing your body to the limits, I feel like it just has these really interesting cognitive side effects. And like one is somehow, and I don't know if you've encountered this before, but this idea of flow state. And I realized that I feel like there's physical flow state, there's cognitive flow state. And, just as an example, so when I'm on the soccer field, and soccer field is a little bit weird to me because just sports wise, it's literally like, it's like a fourth or fifth language, man. Like I see these bros, they've been doing soccer since they were probably 4. And you can just tell like it's so baked into the neurons, like they didn't even think about it.
The way their foot moves with that ball, it's like that's what I'm saying. One thing, right?
It's literally. And so for me, however, like there's a little bit of cognitive overhead, man. Like if I'm about to make a play, like there's a non-zero cognitive overhead required with, hey man, like how am I going to thread this needle with the ball and get it to this row that's running down the side of the field? But somehow, so even on the field though, occasionally, even with the fourth or fifth sports language, you can occasionally get into these flow states. And I feel that somehow they're analogous to these flow states that you get when you're in the cognitive zone too. And but it seems to be during those cognitive flow states that these crazy ideas come. And I feel like somehow, these physical and these cognitive flow states are related. But again, and going back to this conversation we had about the fact that you can't really force community in a similar way, like I'm not exactly sure how to force flow state. And it seems to be, I don't want to say it's kind of a magical, almost otherworldly, almost sort of divine thing or whatever it is. But it's one of those things where when the flow state comes, like I just feel like you have to ride it. But one of the interesting things that, for me is I feel like if you can recognize flow state in these different domains, and this is maybe sports or this is lifting or this is music or this is whatever, somehow you can also recognize them when you're programming or when you're doing this or that. And you can, I don't know what it is, like some people that suffer from these migraines, there's this thing called, I think it's called like prodrome or whatever. This is before the migraine comes, somehow there's like these interesting phenomena like these flashing lights. But almost with the flow state, I feel like somehow there are these indications that flow state is coming and like you have an opportunity. In fact, not an opportunity. I feel like you almost have, you have a responsibility to somehow capture this flow state. If the flow state comes and you abandon the flow state, I almost feel like you've almost done an injustice. Literally, I'd almost say like a disservice to the gods, man. Like you've almost
gifted with this opportunity to go to flow state.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying.
Away, right?
Exactly. Man. But I think somehow, if being in tune with the physical flow state, I just feel like there's this complementary relationship with the cognitive flow state. And I haven't thought about it enough to be able to articulate what the similarities are. But I just feel like somehow there's a virtuous feedback there.
You're also a classic pianist, and you mentioned music there for a second. Are you one of those people that gets into flow state while you're playing?
Well, I'll tell you the truth, man. For about the past 12 years at Google, so I started this thing about 12 years years ago called The Salon. And it was just this like monthly get together of musicians. And the crazy thing about Google, and this is maybe one of the reasons I joined back in the day, is that you can pick any activity, and it could be music, or it could be Olympic weightlifting or whatever. And there's always going to be some person there who's like literally just top of the game. And, there's going to be somebody who deadlifts like 700 pounds and like whatever. And then there's always going to be like some pianist or some kind of musician at the top of the game. But the funny thing for me is like watching the Salon over the past 12 years, like I was always curious about this thing with flow states and musicians. And so one of the things that I notice is that like, and I don't want to say there's two types of musicians. Okay, that's a little bit weird. But when people come to the Salon, I noticed there were people who had internalized the music and just played the music. And there were people who sort of read from the sheet. And I noticed this in myself too. When you're quote unquote reading music from the sheet, there's this interesting, I guess, like bifurcation of your attention span, in which like half of your attention span is decoding this sheet and the other half of your attention span is like playing. And I realized for these people that read from the sheet, I don't feel like they ever truly sort of embodied the music. And so I have like these various long-term projects that I've been working on. So one is like there were these three monumental works that I wanted to get through. So one was like Bach's Walter Clavier, another one was like the Beethoven sonatas, and then the second one is this like Bach's Walter Clavier 2. And so man, like each one of these is like 10-year projects. So probably about 10 years on the Walter, I probably spent about 10 years on the Beethoven sonatas, and now I'm embarked on this Walter Clavier 2 thing. And the crazy thing about Walter Clavier 2 is that Bach sort of wrote this towards the end of his life, like crazy things that happened to him, man, in the middle of this thing, like his second wife died, and just like there's all these really crazy, like these pieces are on the surface are nominally simple, but they're crazy deep, and it's a sort of thing where, maybe if you're not aware of like Bach's sort of trajectory, maybe you might miss some of these subtleties. But my one goal with these like Walter Clavier pieces is to somehow learn them, like make them one with the flesh. And that way when I perform them, like in some sense, it's like, I don't want to say I'm communing with these eternal principles, but somehow I'm in this like state where like it's not necessarily me at a piano, like manipulating this thing physically, but there's some sort of eternal phenomenon that I'm reaching towards, let's say through the medium of this music. And to get to that state, which is a little bit crazy, where somehow the music is one with the flesh, like that, man, I don't even know how that process works. I do know that it takes like, for some reason, it takes a lot of time. Like there's no, like, I guess the more and more I encounter the world and I deal with these things, like the more and more I realize that there are genuinely things that you cannot rush. One of those is community. One of those is becoming one with music. Another one of those is like flow state. There are all these really interesting things in life that like you literally, for some reason, you cannot turn on and off like a tap. And anyway, just as I get more experience in life and I begin to realize like the sort of breadth and depth of those things, it just kind of, I don't know, it's just mysterious, man. But I feel like, music is just one of those crazy things where when you tap into that flow state, it's also a gift. And for some reason, also unforceable, man. I don't, but when it happens, like I'm genuinely grateful, right?
In that moment. But we talked at one of the meetups. So for physical performance, you're playing soccer, rugby, you're hitting the gym. That's throughout the day. You're in day with everything LLMs, everything that's going on in the world, both inside and outside of Google and politics and whatnot. You play piano in the evening. Is that because it helps you wind down? Does it help you kind of escape the realms of AI and be in a different zone for a bit? Like what draws you to it in the evening?
I mean, the crazy thing is I try not to do anything with a negative, a negative motivation. So let's say like I try not to do anything, let's say as a form of escapism. So let's say I invest time in something, like usually I sort of invest time with this positive intention that like I'm going into this thing to kind of learn something or whatever. And the music really at night, it's more of a practical thing. It just happens to be that all the kids have kind of quieted down and they're asleep, and I can sort of, I can play this thing relatively, like the dogs are calm, the cats are calm, the kids are calm, like everybody's kind of, and then I can kind of get down to business. But I don't even know if that's the best. Like there's this funny thing where I remember I was reading this Wikipedia article on like circadian rhythm at some point. And this article is kind of funny because it says basically like everybody kind of has bowel movements at the same time during the day. But they also said like there's this point of the day at 9 a.m., which is like for men for some reason is like peak testosterone or whatever. I think 9 a.m. for some reason was this thing. And I realized 9 a.m. is kind of this magical moment, man. And if you're doing CrossFit or you're doing piano or you're doing anything like cognitive or sports related, like I feel like around that time, there's a little bit of this extra boost of like, peak testosterone or whatever. And so sometimes, man, like, if I happen to be home and the house is quiet and I get like a little bit of 9 a.m. piano time, for some reason it's invested with a little bit more, like I feel like a little bit more vigor. But no, the reason why I do it, and like I think this is like almost a justification after the fact, but there's this funny thing in Plato's Republic where like Socrates, he talks about these people called the guardians of the state. And one of the things he says about the guardians of the state is that they have to be well-versed in gymnastics, music and fighting and all these different arts. But he specifically said like gymnastics and music. And I think back then when they said gymnastics, it wasn't gymnastics in the trivial sense that we have, like it's rings and it's pommel horse. I think it included things like wrestling and fighting and like all these crazy things and running and like whatever. But he said basically if you take somebody and they only have gymnastics or they only have this sort of bodily stuff, he said they get violent. And so what happens is you have to have a little bit of music to kind of temper this violence. And so for me, for some reason, this combination of like physical exertion and musical exertion, for some reason, they seem to have this like interesting complementary effect such that if I have too much of the one or the other, like my life feels imbalanced. And if I have too much rugby, not enough piano, I don't know what it is. Maybe I start to feel a little bit.
Something that like you wake up in the morning and say yesterday was a bad day because it was imbalanced, or
it's more like and I hate to say this, but it'll kick in like after a few days. Like generally I feel like there's a grace period of a few days. And like for me, that magical number is like 3 to 4 days. And so let's say I'm traveling or whatever, and I've gone that length of time, maybe without playing some music or without going to the gym, like I feel like that asymmetry kind of kicks in. And so in some sense, it's a little bit unforgiving. And I don't want to say life is this perpetual treadmill in which you're constantly like practicing, there's some pendulum effect where you're constantly like practicing these complementary things like sports and music. But it feels like, life, there is a certain maintenance like treadmill to these things, like I hate to say it. But yeah, and I notice when I don't have the music, there's something lacking in my day, which is like when I go about work, like one of the things that I enjoy in particular is just having kind of like an otherworldly, almost eternal clarity about the things that I'm doing. And those things could be kind of mundane. Like I could be literally fixing bugs, or it could be because, maybe I talked to Demis Hassabis or some of these guys about some crazy video game project or whatever. But I'd like to have this eternal clarity and this kind of vision about whatever the hell I'm doing, even if it's manifest in these like trivial sort of things. And I feel like for some reason, when the music isn't there, that sense of that eternal clarity, it just kind of evaporates. And I don't want to say it's because the muses have left me, but it feels like that to a certain extent.
I think a lot of people, rightly or wrongly, like instead of music, they replace that in the evening with drinking. Right. And so maybe they're getting physical activity during the day, but like that escapism, again, not escapism, but that outlet for them has been alcohol, whether socially or gluttonous and eating a lot of food and drinking at the same time in the evenings. But 2 or 3 days later, that's when they start to feel like, oh, I've been overdoing it and need to take a step back. But then the weekend rolls around and they perpetuates.
Oh, it's interesting, man, because I remember, one of my favorite passages in Plato is this thing in Socrates where, and I don't know if it's like the Phaedrus or whatever, but Socrates was talking about doctors, and he was talking about the fact that the doctors are the people who are, of the people on the earth, they're most able to cure you and kill you with like equal ability, just because they happen to know about the body a little bit. And so for some reason, the doctor's either your best friend or kind of your worst enemy or whatever. But it's kind of true. I notice these things, like let's say you do need some mechanism to sort of like order the soul and to sort of like wash yourself from all the crazy stuff that happened during the day. Like let's say kind of, cognitively or spiritually speaking, or whatever it is. You're right. I think in some sense you have a decision. Do you go the alcohol route? Do you go the music route? Or whatever the equivalents are? And, maybe you could make the argument that one is sort of constructive and one is kind of destructive. I'm not sure. But you're right. In some sense, for people, maybe they do solve a similar problem. Yeah.
For some, it's sugar. I'd be stupid not to really focus on AI with you. So I want to go back to off camera. We were talking about human in the loop. And Open Sport, we're right there with you. We feel that we're building AI, we're building the infrastructure for AI to be accessible to teams, coaches, athletes, but it's not a replacement. It's their supplement. It's how do you eliminate the 2 to 6 hours of mundane number crunching or data aggregation out of your day so that you can really do what you love, which is get right back there with the athletes and apply all that data and research that you've accumulated during the practice or during the game. But there is this fine line of AI coming into this world, AI just telling you what to train or AI teaching you how to trained? AI helping you get over those plateaus, or AI just giving you a new routine because you've hit a plateau? What are your thoughts on AI's role in physical performance and cognitive performance?
That's such a tough one. So, I think we were talking about this. So one of the experiments I did over the last year, which was, so I've been teaching this CrossFit class at Google, and I thought, you know what? So for the first time in my life, I thought, you know what? I'm going to not outsource this to AI, but I'm going to make it like these workouts are going to be predominantly AI driven, and they're going to sort of be steered by me in the sense that, I'm going to tell the AI like what materials we have available to work out with. We have bars, kettlebells, and sleds and ropes and blah blah blah, and I'm going to give it kind of a basic like macro cadence and micro cadence, and I'm going to tell it furthermore like who are the sorts of people who are coming, and I'm going to give it sort of instructions like the workout should be diverse and blah blah blah. So I thought, okay, I'm going to do this experiment, and I don't want to say it was a failure, man, but it was kind of awful in the sense that like a lot of the workout were repetitive and non-diverse, and furthermore, appeared to come from, let's say, a machine in this case who didn't really have a great physical intuition. Like a machine for whom like a rope climb is roughly equivalent to like a wall ball or like a 100-meter sled push. There was something slightly off, and the claim is that okay, these models are not really embodied in the world. Like in some sense, the model has never really done a rope climb or sort of a bench press or a sled push, and therefore maybe it just kind of lacks this fundamental intuition of what it's like to be in the world. However, I'm assuming that these models have been trained on like a bunch of CrossFit workouts like on the internet, so I feel like it should have some diversity. But it's like the workouts were just they were just boring, man. And then like just about a week ago, I don't know why I resisted going to this place for so long, but like I've known about Jason Khalipa's gym probably for like, I don't know, 10 plus years. And finally last week, I just said, you know what, I'm just going to check out this NC CrossFit, this NC Fit thing. And like the past 2 weeks, like the workouts have been like amazing in the sense that, they've like pushed the boundary of gymnastics and weightlifting and endurance and all these crazy things in ways that like these AI generated workouts like just couldn't hit the spot or wouldn't. So there may be something wrong that I did with, the methodology. But I guess here's the thing that I'm trying to figure out, and I don't know if you're trying to figure this out, but this is something that like in my work with Peter Norvig, like we're trying to see whether LLMs are good teaching companions. And also I'm doing this thing at Oxford right now where we're trying to figure out whether, LLMs can help like these philosophy students sort of first-year philosophy students craft papers, but where the LLM doesn't tell you what to do, it's this kind of like guide. In some sense, if you go to Oxford, you have this thing called the tutor, and there's this like one-on-one relationship sort of thing. And the question is whether AI can help humans scale by being the primary point of contact, and then you sort of have like a backup person to kind of come and just like sort of oversee or just kind of sanity check what the AI is doing. So it's sort of AI first. Like when I hear AI, human in the loop, I usually think, okay, AI first with like a human sanity checker. And then I guess the reason being is because it turns out that human relationships don't necessarily scale, right? So it's hard to scale this tutor relationship. It's hard to scale like the trainer relationship. It's hard to scale those sort of things. So maybe AI can help with that. But just the thing that I'm trying to figure out is whether AI makes a good like simulacrum or whatever you want to call it, or whether AI can imitate these people who are sort of the best at what they do. And simply because, at least in cases like, I feel like this is, and maybe you can tell me what you think, but in physical training or in musical training or in tutoring or all that sort of stuff, there's a certain amount of like emotional intelligence, and there's this like sort of relationship aspect which I feel like is maybe slightly difficult to replicate with today's models.
I've got this one visual that I love where AI works extremely well in structured data environments. Right? When the data is structured properly, it's clean cut, it's repetitive, AI works amazingly well. AI does not work well in human performance, whether physical or mental, because human data is very chaotic. And especially in professional sports, you have different wearables, you have different seasons of data, you got different wellness reports, match stats. All these different data are in very different silos, and you try to aggregate that together, not only for a team, but then you have each individual athlete. And so to your point of where does this kind of come in, like human has to be in the loop. You need to have some human to kind of guide this because each person is different. An injury randomly or happens over time can throw everything off. And so all that structured data that you did put together on that human is now, I wouldn't say irrelevant, but like it needs that human to come in and say, nope, there's an Achilles injury. These type of routines won't be suitable for this. But this is also a time problem. I think AI is so brand new. I know we've been a day in AI feels like a month in AI. But what does this look like 2 years, 5 years from now? And this is that world model concept as well. Can world models come in and play a role in human performance? If there's enough data there for Peter, not for CrossFitters as a whole, but for Peter himself, if AI has 2, 3, 5, 10 years worth of your performance, does it understand Peter's hit a peak or a plateau? Let's change up his routine. Or he did this routine 6 months ago or 6 years ago. Let's bring that back. We really enjoy that. But it's just not enough data in a structured environment for AI to work.
Right, that's a great point. And one of the promises of like these new models, like these large language models at least, is that they were supposed to be able to deal even with unstructured data, right? And that was kind of one of the big promises. And like, let's say even in things like, so athletics is chaotic, but like the market is chaotic. And the idea is that, LLMs are supposed to be able to make sense of a chaotic market to be able to help traders trade and that sort of business. And so if that's true and LLMs can make good on that, then I wonder whether you're right, whether it's merely a data problem. And in some sense, if you do have a nice sort of like 5-year, kind of 5 to 10 year horizon of data, whether, the LLMs can start to make sense of that. Yeah, my intuition says you're right. I mean, we've just got to the point now where we're thinking about these world models. My sense is that we still need to do a little bit of work before the LLMs have a great intuition for what it's like to be embodied in the world. And right now, everything is somehow, it's mediated by like language. And I wonder, I hate to say this, but I wonder whether these models have to like actually be like literally embodied in the world to a certain extent, and in order to get an intuition for what it's like to be a meat sack, I guess we'll see, man. I have a bunch of these like startups hitting me up every once in a while to come like build, the next like household humanoid robots or whatever. And anyway, yeah, I wonder if that's like the next horizon,
Well, speaking about horizon, you've got young kids. Do you see a distinction between boomers, Gen X, millennials, Gen Z, Gen A, like how they use AI? And do you see them using it differently for their own personal use, physical wellness or mental wellness, let alone, like, let's leave high school homework out of the equation, because I've heard your son using it for projects outside of those type of use cases.
I love Gen Alpha, man. Like one of the things I notice about my kids, and there's a range between, I guess, about like 6 and, was it about like 6, 7, and 13 now, right? There's sort of a range there. But one of the things that I've noticed about them is that they've rediscovered things like IRL and voice. And like, let's say, whereas millennials are like heavy texters and Gen Z even, Gen Alpha men, like they like to call each other. It's really kind of funny. And I feel like they're rediscovering what it kind of means to connect. But I noticed one of the things that my kids like hate is any kind of like AI generated slop or whatever. Like one of the things I did to my son, and I don't know if he'll forgive me, is like, I know he had this birthday and I just said, you know what, I'm going to print this poster, which is just, I think there was like some Sonic movie at the time. It was just like Sonic building Legos. And I printed some of these things. I popped them on the wall and he's like, Dad, he's like, why would you do this to me, bro? Like it's my birthday, man. And you pop in like this slop up on the wall. And oh God, like, so, and then I did this other, I had this interesting experiment I was doing with Google at the time where we were trying to figure out whether we could do Gemini in Roblox. And so this was sort of like Gemini as a Roblox companion. And, it turns out that like, I don't know, Roblox is a little bit weird because in some sense it's slightly more sophisticated, I feel like, than people give it credit for, in the sense that you have these like, I don't know, let's just say for the sake of argument, maybe kind of 10 to 12-year-old kids in like Steal a Brain Rot or whatever, like constantly wheeling and dealing like little entrepreneurs and making trades. And if you did have some sort of AI assistant in there, man, that thing would really have to be like on top of like literally sort of hourly changes in the kind of brain rot market, just crazy things like that. But one of the things I noticed early on in this experiment is, like I had Gemini in this Roblox thing. And if the kids caught a whiff of the fact that it was a bot, they would rebel. Like literally, bro, there's a bot on the server, like kick them. And so the funny thing is, man, I don't know if it's just because they're utterly inundated with this AI thing, but they have this like almost visceral, like, kind of reaction to it. And I kind of noticed that in Gen Alpha, not so much, the Gen Z millennials, yeah, maybe not so much, man. Yeah, but and then Gen X has always just been a little bit weird, a little bit weird. But I'm curious to see how that's going to shape, because on the one hand, I notice my kids have this visceral reaction. On the other hand, I feel like they're utterly dependent on it, and in some sense, like I don't want to say they've outsourced thinking to it, but I think like you mentioned, one of my son's things, my wife said, listen, Carlos, you have to learn how to think, and my son said, and this kind of broke my heart. He said to his mom, he said, listen, Mom, he said, I can think, I just like I don't like my thoughts anymore. He noticed that when he writes essays in his own voice, like he tends to get like downgraded. And so in some sense, he feels like he has to rely on AI to kind of like make the grade. And I thought, God, how like tragic is that? So it's going to be interesting to me see how that plays out. Like if there is this kind of visceral reaction on the one hand and a dependency on the other, that's like sort of that's almost a weird kind of, love-hate sort of oxymoronic thing. So
what you were saying about your son, that reminds me of the study that you did about the pencil pushers and the LLM users. And it's very relevant data. Like people that are, maybe just give a recap for our audience, but the people that are pencil pushers are just that much more cognitively aware and in tune.
No, it's true. And I think the study talking about, they were just, they gave these people like a creative task and they hooked them up to these fMRIs. And yeah, you had pencil and paper and Google search and LLM people. And the pencil and paper people, bro, they're like just cognitively, man, we're on fire. They're like just these spots in the brain that were like lit up. And the Google people were a little more diffuse. And then the LLM people were just like totally inert. And, and like, it's one of those crazy things where, so Anthropic got in touch like last week. And so I think it's this Friday or whatever. I have to go do like an interview. And I've been doing so much vibe coding. I'm like, damn, I don't even know. I mean, if they ask me to like code some stuff, I don't even know, man. Like, I don't, frankly, I'm going to have to go like back to lead code or whatever. And so, yeah, honestly, with that sort of like cognitive atrophy or whatever you want to call it, I don't know how that's going to shape. I don't know how that's going to like, kind of go in the long term. But I will tell you this. So it was summer before last, I had this intern and Corey, and we managed to get him back into Google. Like he did a fantastic job for his internship. He came back, he got a full-time offer. Like he's working at DeepMind now. And I was just kind of curious, like, because people have been talking a lot about new grads and the situation and, where the new grads are being passed over for AI. And so I sort of looked at Corey as almost a little bit like an oracle, like what's it like working as a new grad now? And I watch his day and it's crazy because in some sense he's had to master this art of, I don't want to say it's ADHD, but he's essentially like a shepherd of AI agents, working on like 6 to 10 tasks at a time. And so a lot of his job is like, doing this like cognitive mode switch in between, task to task to task to task. And I'm thinking, wow, man, like, oh, that's, I don't know, bro. It looks rough. I guess.
Funniest meme or video. Somebody put it like a day in the life of an engineer today is the daily stand-up. So what did you do yesterday? So I was working on this problem, coding this. And at 1 o'clock, I ran out of tokens. So that's it. And so today I'll be picking it up where I left off yesterday. And hopefully I don't run out of tokens by 1 o'clock. But
that's funny, bro. No, I mean, I wonder if tokens are going to be like the new currency, bro. It's like,
Peter, this has been an awesome conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time to spend time with us.
Thank you so much, man.
I want to close off with one question. You're a husband, a father. The easy thing for me to ask, like, what have you instilled in your family and your kids about physical and mental wellness? I want to reverse it. What has your wife and what have your kids helped you realize about mental wellness, and how do they keep you in check?
It's interesting, man. So every time I go off the deep end to a certain extent, my wife always keeps me in check. And so like, let's say, because there is this pendulum effect, man. And sometimes maybe like I'm literally playing too much soccer. I'm not hitting the gym enough or like vice versa. And so she'll notice these kind of asymmetries in me. But also, I don't know what it is, man. Like I kind of think about maybe the counterfactual universe in which, let's say I wasn't a father and all that stuff. And it would be really hard for me to picture sort of doing the things that I'm doing because there's a sense in which like daily somehow my wife and my kids and even my dogs and the cats and all that, they ground me, like let's say I'm in the middle of some crazy project and, every 90 minutes or whatever, the dogs have to piss. I have to go touch grass, like literally. And, and that's what's, and that sort of thing is amazing. But even just like, I'll be working on some crazy project and like this Gemini and Roblox thing was kind of an example. And it was a difficult project. And so sometimes like I'll have this thing and I'll show it to my kids and like immediately just on their face, I can just tell that this whole thing is cringeworthy. And like, it's just like, I can get this fucking fantastic, like emperor has no clothes feedback about like whatever the hell I'm working on, and then with my wife, it's just, I don't know, man, she's always kind of reminding me of the important things in life. Like, we get together and part of our nightly ritual is just, we went through like this AFI top 100 movie list. And now I think we're making it through like this Rotten Tomatoes 300 or whatever, but just somehow to like, I don't know, touch base with these rituals that we've like established and to connect and that sort of thing. Like, oh man, I can't even tell you. I mean, these rituals sound a little bit trivial, but I can't even tell you what sort of a grounding effect they have on your life, man. And in the absence of that, like I could just see sort of becoming kind of untethered and just, I don't know, man, kind of drifting away. You know what I mean? So in that sense, I'm really grateful for that,
I think AI is exciting, it's scary, but the underlying theme here is human connection can never be replaced.
That's right.
Whether that's through community at the gym, on the soccer field, in a music studio, at work, human connection is what we all need a little more of in our lives.
All right. I love that, man. Yeah.
Peter, thank you for joining us.
I really appreciate it. Thanks so much.